When whispers of betrayal began to swirl through the palace corridors, no one expected the storm that followed. What started as a quiet insult behind closed doors erupted into a full-blown power reckoning that left the monarchy stunned. And at the heart of it all, Catherine, Princess of Wales, and the men who risked everything to defend her. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It began not with headlines, but with a hush, a murmur. Catherine, standing alone after a long engagement, overheard a chilling remark, one that would unravel the palace's carefully maintained mask of unity. It wasn't from an outsider, nor a tabloid desperate for a story. No, it came from within the palace itself. A senior royal figure, with influence stitched deep into the fabric of the crown, was overheard questioning whether Catherine truly had the fire to become queen consort. The words hit like a dagger cloaked in silk. The woman who had given the monarchy dignity, modernity, and quiet strength was suddenly under attack by the very institution she had devoted herself to uphold. The remark didn't stay hidden. As rumours crept across Kensington and into Buckingham's formal walls, they carried with them a heavy stench of treachery. At first, Catherine said nothing. She continued with grace, her silence misread by some as submission. But William heard the whisper too, and he recognised it not just as an insult to his wife, but as an attack on the future of the monarchy itself. Still, he bided his time. There was no need for a spectacle. Not yet. Behind the scenes, his inner circle began to stir. A small but fiercely loyal group began preparing, quietly and with precision, to counter the brewing narrative. While some staff members chose to remain neutral, others made their loyalties known. The divide within the palace was no longer invisible. You were either with Catherine, or you were part of the rot. The tension simmered beneath royal smiles and carefully staged appearances, but it was about to boil over. What no one expected was the betrayal that came next. A high-ranking aide, previously considered discreet and trustworthy, leaked a confidential report detailing a private moment of emotional vulnerability from Catherine. It was a deliberate strike, a moment of personal pain twisted into a palace-wide weapon. The leak shattered the illusion of silence. What had once been whispers became confrontation. Catherine's dignity had been weaponized, her grace mocked, but it was this act, this line crossed, that lit the fuse beneath William's team. They were protecting the heart of the crown, and they were prepared to go to war for it. But what exactly did Catherine endure, and why did defending her become the ultimate act of rebellion? What if the crown you were born to wear was suddenly questioned by those closest to it? For Catherine, the attack didn't come with swords, it came with words, whispered in corners, weaponized through silence. And when she finally broke her silence, it wasn't to complain, it was to protect. The whisper that shook the palace did not come from the tabloids or the outside world, it came from within. A senior courtier, long considered part of the king's trusted circle, allegedly declared behind closed doors that Catherine lacked the royal fire required to become queen. It wasn't said with passion, nor in anger. It was spoken with cold dismissal, as if it were already consensus. The weight of those words, cruel in their calculation, began to poison the air around her. But Catherine said nothing. She held her silence like a shield, continuing her royal duties with unshakable poise, until the silence itself betrayed her. Someone, perhaps emboldened by the initial remark, crossed a far more personal line. A private moment, an emotional conversation held in confidence, was secretly recorded. The clip, never meant for public ears, captured Catherine at her most human, reflecting on her doubts, her burdens, her loneliness. No, it was far more sinister than that. It was circulated internally among the very people sworn to protect her dignity, shared behind backs, whispered in judgmental tones. It became palace currency, traded in silence, used to discredit the woman next in line to be queen. William, who had heard the rumours but withheld action, now burned with fury. Yet he remained outwardly calm, allowing no one to see the storm that had begun to rise behind his eyes. Catherine, too, refused to falter. She fulfilled engagements with grace, smiled when cameras flashed, and gave speeches with quiet conviction. But behind the protocol, she was bleeding. And that wound didn't go unnoticed for long. The media, ever hungry for fractures in the royal veneer, began spinning a narrative: loyalists versus commoners. Headlines hinted at internal feuds, suggesting Catherine was too modern, too middle class, too polished to truly belong to the throne's ancient lineage. The whispers had breached the walls. Then came the palace leaks. Anonymous sources, speaking in carefully measured phrases, began feeding reporters lines about growing concern over Catherine's readiness. They painted her as overwhelmed, emotionally fragile, and increasingly isolated within the firm. But behind closed doors, the truth was far more dangerous, for those seeking to undermine her had not anticipated resistance. Princess Anne, long a guardian of royal tradition, called for an emergency council. Those present would later say her voice was calm but sharp as a blade. She demanded answers, not just about the recording, but about the integrity of the royal institution itself. A line had been crossed, and Anne knew it. What began as a few whispered doubts had now erupted into open division, exposing the fault lines in a monarchy built on appearance and protocol. And while Catherine held her silence, William's team was already preparing for war. The crown's future would no longer be protected by tradition, it would be defended by loyalty, strategy, and confrontation. With tensions rising and loyalty lines drawn, William's team made a choice that would alter the monarchy forever. Every crown has its court, and every court has its warriors. William's team, long considered polished and diplomatic, suddenly transformed into something more dangerous. A shield. As the palace threatened to eat its own, these men drew a line in the royal sand right behind Catherine. They were never meant to be soldiers. Sir James Royston, the calculating chief of staff, known for his discretion and quiet strategy. Amelia Trent, sharp-tongued and media-savvy, who had spent years deflecting scandal with a smile. And Captain Hugh Melverton, a former military tactician turned royal security advisor, whose silence spoke louder than most speeches. They were professionals, loyal, reserved, impeccably trained. But the day Catherine was targeted, they ceased being staff. They became defenders. Team Wales, as they would later be known, wasn't born in public, but in whispers and sealed rooms, quietly laying the groundwork for a counter-offensive that would shake the monarchy to its core. It began with a leak this time, from inside William's office. Not a betrayal, but a statement. A series of internal memos, strategically exposed, revealed that senior staff had been coordinating media briefings to highlight Catherine's achievements, her growing popularity, and her unique bond with the public. The press began to shift. Negative stories were countered within hours. Positive features appeared in friendly papers with uncanny timing. The narrative was no longer slipping, William's team was gripping it tightly. But this wasn't just PR, it was control. And for the first time, the old palace structure began to feel it slipping away. William, watching the quiet war unfold, gave the signal no one expected: full autonomy. He told his team to do what was necessary to push back. The gloves came off. Meetings were scheduled with private investigators. Background checks were reopened. Rumors of unauthorized surveillance on Catherine's staff began surfacing. And those investigators? Some never returned to their roles on the royal payroll, their silence reportedly bought with non-disclosure agreements and discreet settlements. But the message was clear. Team Wales would not play by the old rules, not when their loyalty had been turned into a weapon. Tension surged through the palace like a live wire. The king's advisors, many of them relics from a past era, watched in horror as the rules they lived by were rewritten in real time. There were hushed complaints of overreach, of disrespecting tradition. But it wasn't until Queen Camilla herself entered the fray that the palace truly fractured. In a closed-door confrontation, she reportedly accused William's team of recklessness, warning that their aggression was damaging the royal institution. The irony, of course, was lost on no one. Catherine's honor had been shredded in silence, yet defending it was now the greater crime. Lines had been drawn. and while the king remained silent, the walls around him began to tremble. For what started as a tactical defense was quickly becoming something more dangerous. A movement. One that wasn't just protecting Catherine's future, but threatening to redefine the balance of power within the monarchy itself. But what began as defense would soon ignite a confrontation that neither king nor kingdom could ignore. In a rare face-to-face showdown, Queen Camilla confronts William's inner circle, accusing them of undermining the monarchy. But what she doesn't expect is that they've come prepared, armed not just with evidence, but with the king's own vulnerabilities. Behind palace gates, the atmosphere had grown thick with tension. Queen Camilla, feeling the walls of influence tightening around her, made a calculated move. She arranged a private council with King Charles, pressing him to put an end to what she described as a dangerous campaign led by William's team. She claimed their actions were destabilizing the monarchy, violating the sanctity of royal neutrality and pushing boundaries that were never meant to be crossed. But what she failed to see, what she refused to believe, was that the storm had already passed the point of containment. William's team wasn't just defending Catherine anymore, they were reshaping the palace's power from the inside. Camilla's intervention didn't remain confined to whispers. Within days, William was made aware of the conversation, and he responded not with avoidance, but with confrontation. In a meeting kept entirely off the palace calendar, William faced Camilla directly. It wasn't a discussion, it was a reckoning, and he didn't come alone. Beside him stood Captain Hugh Melverton, no longer silent, holding a dossier containing allegations that left the Queen Consort visibly shaken. It pointed to a member of her personal staff, someone with direct ties to the internal leaks and misinformation aimed at Catherine. The documents included timestamps, message logs, and discreetly gathered testimony. It wasn't speculation, it was proof. Faced with the fallout, King Charles was dragged into the conflict, but instead of taking control, he did what he had done so many times before he mediated. His public silence became the loudest response of all. The king, once a symbol of continuity, now appeared paralyzed between two sides of his own family. The absence of a royal statement only fueled the inferno. Rumors grew, whispers turned into headlines. It was no longer just a family dispute, it was a constitutional fracture cloaked in tradition. And then Princess Anne spoke, not to the press, not to the public, but to the family itself. In a direct message to Charles, she voiced her support for Catherine, calling the actions against her cowardly, cruel, and unbecoming of a royal household. Coming from Anne, who rarely involved herself in palace politics, the message was a bombshell. It left Camilla isolated, her allies dwindling by the hour. Days later, citing exhaustion, the Queen Consort quietly withdrew from several public events. But behind palace doors, insiders whispered something far more serious, that she hadn't stepped back for her health, but because she had been warned. The silence that followed was louder than any scandal that had come before it. Lines had been crossed, allegiances had shifted, and the old rules were now crumbling under the weight of exposure. But as the dust settled, it was the king seemingly absent from the chaos who made the next move, a move no one predicted. And then, without warning, the king made a decision that sent shockwaves through every corner of the monarchy. In the midst of scandal, King Charles steps forward, not with reprimand but with reward. His decision? To formally promote William's entire team, making their loyalty official and their authority indisputable. The royal court had reached an impasse. With tension mounting and silence no longer sustainable, King Charles was left with two options: assert control or appear complicit in the growing divide. What came instead was a move so calculated, so publicly symbolic, that it caught both allies and critics off guard. Without fanfare, a royal decree was issued. A proclamation signed by the sovereign himself elevated William's senior staff to positions of unprecedented influence. Sir James Royston, long operating behind the curtain, was formally named Senior Royal Liaison to the Sovereign, a title that, on paper, placed him directly at the heart of palace decision-making. Others followed suit, receiving appointments that not only legitimized their authority, but broadcasted one undeniable truth. Power was shifting, and it was shifting toward William. The response was immediate. In the halls of government, whispers turned into strategy meetings. In the media, headlines clashed. Some praised Charles for recognizing the strength and effectiveness of William's camp, interpreting the move as a modern monarch embracing a new generation. But others saw weakness. They called it a capitulation, a subtle admission that Charles had lost control, and that the monarchy was no longer governed from the throne, but from Kensington. The language may have remained diplomatic, but the message beneath was explosive. It wasn't just a promotion, it was a coronation by proxy. Even more telling was the absence that followed. Queen Camilla, so often at Charles's side during official engagements, was nowhere to be seen during the formal acknowledgement of the appointments. Her absence wasn't explained, nor was it ignored. The press noticed, courtiers noticed, and most importantly, the public noticed. For a queen consort already under pressure, her silence was deafening. The question quickly became unavoidable. Was the promotion of William's team a direct rebuke of Camilla's influence, or a desperate attempt to restore peace between fractured factions? Inside the palace, rumours spun furiously. Some claimed Charles had been pressured into the move by Princess Anne and other senior royals hoping to avert further division. Others believed it was a personal decision, one born not of strategy, but of exhaustion. There were whispers that the king had grown weary of defending shadows while the spotlight turned against him. That by elevating William's camp, he was buying himself time, or distancing himself from the chaos ignited by Camilla's involvement. What remained certain was this: the centre of power had moved. The titles may not have changed, but the influence had. The king may have signed the decree, but it was William's team now directing the monarchy's future. And as the ink dried on the royal parchment, a new question began to surface, quietly but persistently, one that had never before been spoken aloud. As the palace realigned its power, the public began asking the one question no one had dared whisper before: a king still sits on the throne, but is he truly in charge? With Catherine's defenders now promoted, and Charles stepping back from key duties, insiders begin to whisper what once would have been treason, that William is ruling already. The palace may not have made an announcement, but those paying attention knew the shift had already begun. Charles, battered by weeks of internal conflict and public unease, began cancelling key meetings, leaving critical decisions in the hands of his heir. At first, it was subtle. William, attending strategy briefings meant for the monarch, quietly stepping in when Charles was unavailable. But then, the change became structural. Invitations once signed by the king now bore the insignia of the Prince of Wales. Memos, once addressed to Charles's advisors, were rerouted to William's newly empowered inner circle, and soon, William wasn't just attending meetings, he was leading them. Within weeks, the royal press office began issuing statements with a new tone, a new voice, and, most tellingly, a new crest. Not the traditional seal of the king, but the mark of the Prince of Wales. Subtle at first, but unmistakable. It was as though a different throne had emerged, one not declared, but demonstrated. And at its side, Catherine's presence grew exponentially. New patronages were accepted under her name, entire programs restructured with her influence, and public appearances executed with flawless precision. What had once been ceremonial now felt sovereign. Her speeches carried the weight of a queen not in title, but in truth. Inside the palace, the shifts were seismic. Senior staff who had long served Charles quietly requested reassignment or early retirement. There were no grand departures, only silent exits. Their replacements? Young, modern, fiercely loyal to William and Catherine's vision. The structure that had once centered around the monarch now operated as a streamlined machine under William's direction. But while the machinery changed, the monarchy's face remained the same, until one meeting deepened the suspicion into something closer to confirmation. Princess Anne, a stalwart of discretion, requested a private audience with William. No agenda was published, no press release followed. But what occurred behind those closed doors would send waves throughout the firm. Days later, Anne abruptly shifted her schedule to appear beside Catherine at a youth initiative long associated with the Queen Consort. It wasn't an accident, it was a signal. For a royal known to keep her distance from emotional politics, the alignment with William's team could only mean one thing. Anne had seen enough to make her choice. The public saw it too. Commentators, once cautious about speculating on royal dynamics, began openly referring to the new firm. The phrase spread like wildfire. William, Catherine, and their newly promoted team, rising in visibility and control. Royal watchers began calling them the true face of the monarchy. And although no crown had changed hands, the nation began to ask what the palace refused to admit. Had the transition already happened? But one final gesture would seal this transformation, and it came from the one person no one expected. In a stunning move that shattered tradition, King Charles publicly bows his head to Catherine during a royal engagement, a moment caught on camera, shared worldwide, and dissected by every palace watcher on earth. It was more than respect. It was a signal. The event had all the markings of ceremonial routine, a grand state banquet, the monarchy on full display, diplomats gathered, protocol rehearsed down to the second. Yet beneath the polished surface, tension rippled. The palace was still reeling from the reshuffling of power, and the public was already whispering about the rise of the new generation. But nothing could have prepared the world for what happened that night. When the time came for formal remarks, it was expected that the king would lead, as tradition demands. Instead, with a measured glance and deliberate motion, Charles turned toward Catherine and gestured for her to speak first. It was subtle, graceful, but unmistakable. He did not step back, he bowed. For centuries, protocol had dictated who speaks, who leads, who is deferred to. That single gesture, one reigning monarch giving symbolic precedence to the Princess of Wales, sent shockwaves through the entire institution. It wasn't merely a change in schedule. It was a quiet dethroning of expectation. And the moment Catherine rose, a second act of unspoken power followed. William reached out and placed his hand gently on her back, not to guide, but to affirm. The gesture confirmed what insiders had long been whispering. Catherine was no longer waiting to be queen. She was already ruling in all the ways that mattered. But where some saw reverence, others saw collapse. Camilla, whose presence had already grown faint in recent weeks, was seen exiting the engagement early, her expression unreadable. Those close to her claimed illness. But sources inside the palace whispered that the Queen Consort had not been informed of the planned gesture, if it was planned at all. The footage didn't just spark curiosity, it ignited headlines. The Queen in everything but title. Is Catherine already reigning? Clips were replayed across every major network, dissected frame by frame. The bow, the silence, the rise, it became the new royal language, a visual proclamation that the people had long waited for, but never expected to see so soon. And the public answered. Polls surged in favor of William and Catherine. Commentators, once cautious, began suggesting a formalized co-sovereign model. Some royal watchers argued the moment was a modern evolution. Others feared it was the beginning of the end for Charles's reign. But regardless of interpretation, one truth remained unshakable: the power dynamic had shifted irreversibly. Not through decree, not through scandal, but through one silent, stunning moment that made every other signal undeniable. The palace had just lived through a symbolic coronation without a crown, and while the outside world celebrated this changing of the guard, within the palace walls, something far darker was stirring. Because in the wake of Catherine's rise, those who had fought to suppress her were not finished. Their silence was not surrender, but in the shadows of this coronation by stealth, one final betrayal was quietly being prepared. Not everyone celebrated the rise of Catherine. In the silence beneath the throne rooms, a faction of the old monarchy began to stir, plotting to restore the old balance, no matter the cost. And their first target? Catherine's most loyal protector. As the public marveled at the symbolic shift unfolding in plain sight, a different kind of war brewed in the shadows. The corridors of power, once ruled by protocol, now pulsed with whispers of betrayal. It began with a name, an old term resurfacing behind closed doors. The Loyalist Circle. They weren't official. They weren't sanctioned. But they existed, bound by a common belief that the monarchy had drifted too far, too fast. Most were once close to Camilla, holdovers from the years when her presence signaled the future. Now, feeling pushed aside and watching their influence dissolve with every rise in Catherine's stature, they decided to act. Quietly, strategically, and without mercy. Sir James Royston had become the face of loyalty, elevated by Charles himself, respected across the royal staff, and known for protecting Catherine at all costs. He became the obvious threat and the prime target. One morning, a package was delivered to his private residence. No return address, no markings. Inside was a single envelope containing a list coded references, veiled warnings, and an unmistakable message: step aside or be dismantled. Royston didn't flinch. He brought it straight to William. But by then, the plan had already begun to move. Behind the scenes, William's team began uncovering a far more dangerous scheme, one designed not to harm Catherine physically, but to destroy her reputation piece by piece. A cache of forged documents was discovered, planted to appear as if Catherine had knowingly interfered in a royal grant process. The papers bore seals, signatures, and falsified correspondence almost indistinguishable from the real thing. It was a precision hit, a quiet scandal ready to detonate, but someone within the palace hesitated, a weak link. The information found its way to William's desk before it could be released, and in that moment, the true scale of the rebellion became clear. Charles was informed immediately. The king listened, nodded, and then, to the disbelief of his inner circle, he did nothing. He issued no statement. He made no move to confront those implicated. Whether out of exhaustion, guilt, or silent alignment, his inaction spoke volumes. The message was chilling. The old palace could still act without resistance. But Catherine was not without her own allies. Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, long seen as a steady hand behind the scenes, delivered a quiet warning to Catherine in the aftermath. She had overheard conversations, heard names, and she made it clear. The palace was no longer neutral ground. Sides were being chosen, and trust had become a dangerous currency. What had once been a family was now a chessboard, each move more calculated than the last. Every room, every corridor, every conversation became layered with strategy. No gesture was casual. No silence was accidental. What began as a quiet rebellion had evolved into a full-scale power play. And as the tension closed in on all sides, one truth became undeniable. The next move would not be about optics or legacy. It would be about survival. With the monarchy teetering between two futures, one final confrontation will determine who truly holds the crown. As the curtain closes on one era, another rises with unshakable grace. Catherine, once doubted, once demeaned, now stands surrounded by allies forged in fire, and behind her, a retreating queen, her influence dimming with every step. The monarchy has chosen, and the world has noticed. It began not with a coronation, but with a summit. One that broke every rule of tradition. Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood before a global assembly of diplomats, dignitaries, and world leaders, not as a supporting figure, but as the face of the crown. Neither Charles nor Camilla were present. No throne was placed behind her, no anthem preceded her speech. But the message was unmistakable. This was her moment. The applause that followed echoed far beyond the walls of the summit chamber. It reached the gates of Buckingham, the steps of Westminster, and the living rooms of millions who had quietly watched her transformation from dutiful royal to sovereign force. The palace, sensing the shift, made it official. A public statement was released from the King's office, brief, clinical, but historic. Catherine would now be recognized as Queen in Waiting, a term never before used in modern royal language. Not future consort, not princess preparing for the role. Queen in Waiting. The phrasing was deliberate, and it changed everything. It confirmed what the public already believed, that Catherine wasn't simply next, she was now. Hours later, a second announcement stunned even those within the palace. Camilla, Queen Consort, would be stepping back from all official duties, indefinitely. Just a quiet exit from a stage she had once fought so hard to claim. Sources close to the royal household suggested the decision was mutual. Others whispered it was forced. But in truth, it no longer mattered. The monarchy had realigned, and Camilla no longer had a place in its forward motion. In contrast, William and Catherine's popularity soared to heights not seen since the days of Diana. Their every appearance drew massive crowds, every word covered by the press with reverence rather than scrutiny. But perhaps the most powerful endorsement came not from the people, nor from the crown, but from within. Princess Anne, who had remained guarded through every scandal and shift, penned a rare public letter. In it, she praised Catherine's quiet strength, her unflinching sense of duty, and her ability to lead not with noise but with presence. It was more than approval, it was a passing of the torch. Then came the final symbol, subtle, intentional. The royal crest, updated quietly on palace documents, now bore not one but 2 lions standing at its base. No announcement accompanied the change. No explanation was given. But to those who understood the monarchy's language of symbols, it spoke volumes. This was no longer a kingdom waiting, it was a monarchy transformed. And so, with honour defended, loyalty rewarded, and enemies quietly exiled, Catherine, Princess of Wales, rises, not with a crown, but with the unshakable power of a nation behind her. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.